The other cattlemen at the Rawls County sale barn in Missouri said the 90 calves in Pen 14 were not worth the paperwork. $7 a head was the number that had come up in conversation near the coffee machine that morning, said half as a joke, because you had to say something when you looked at them. They were fall calves, weaned late, and they had come in off a drought operation from down near Callaway County, thin, rough-coated, and most of them showing the wet cough and cloudy eyes that experienced men read as a sign to walk away and not look back. The vet who did the barn's presale inspection had noted bovine respiratory disease in the lot documentation. 3 of the 90 were already pulled and penned separately before the sale even started. The man who bought all 87 remaining calves was named Arlen Moss. He paid $6.40 per head at the drop of the hammer. That was $557.60 total, for calves that every experienced man in that barn had decided weren't worth their time. 11 months later, a respiratory fever moved through Rawls County and the 4 counties surrounding it and killed cattle in numbers that hadn't been seen in that part of Missouri since the 1990s. Arlen Moss lost none, not one animal. This is how that happened. This is the kind of story my father would tell. If yours did too, this channel is for you. Subscribe, and we'll keep telling them. It was the first Tuesday of November 2017. The Rawls County sale barn sits on the east edge of New London on a county highway. A low metal building with a gravel lot that fills up before the sun is fully up on sale days. The smell of that place on a November morning is something specific. Cattle and sawdust, and the particular cold that comes off a concrete floor when the barn doors have been opened and closed 100 times before 8 o'clock. There were maybe 60 buyers registered that day, most of them cow-calf operators from Rawls and Monroe and Pike counties. A few order buyers working phones for operations further out. The Pen 14 lot had drawn some attention at preview. That's the thing about visibly sick cattle. They don't go unnoticed. People stopped in front of that pen, looked for a moment, and moved on. The math wasn't complicated. Even if you bought that lot for nothing, and the bird ran at normal mortality rates in a stressed receiving situation, you were looking at the possibility of losing a quarter of them before spring. And the ones that survived a serious respiratory event early in their lives often didn't finish as well as animals that hadn't been compromised. You didn't have to be an expert to understand why the pen was sitting there without any buyers circling it. The man who noticed Arlen Moss in Pen 14 that morning was Dale Eckert. Dale had been the Rawls County Extension Agent for Agriculture for going on 19 years at that point, and he came to the sale barn on the first Tuesday of the month partly to keep tabs on what was moving through the county, and partly because his father had done the same thing, and some habits outlast their original reasons. He told me this story in his office at the Extension Building in New London in the spring of 2022, careful with the facts and slower with the conclusions. Dale had been watching Pen 14 for the same reason everyone else had. He counted the wet coughs from across the ring and got to 11 in under 2 minutes, which was the kind of number that told you bird had moved through that lot and wasn't done moving. He made a note in his log, not because anything unusual had happened yet, but because that many compromised calves coming out of a Callaway County drought operation was the kind of thing worth writing down. Then Arlen Moss raised his hand. Arlen was 61 years old that November and had been running cattle on a 340-acre operation in the northeastern corner of Rawls County since he was 26. He was not a large buyer. He was not a man people watched particularly. He came to sales in the same Carhartt jacket he'd had for a long time, drove an F-250 that was not new, and did not make a lot of conversation. Not unfriendly, not a talker. He bid on the sick calves when nobody else did, took them at $6.40 a head, and went to the office to do the paperwork without a word to anyone. Dale Eckert watched him go. He wrote something else in his notebook. He thought, as honestly as he could recall when he told me the story 4 years later, that a man had made a mistake. The thing Dale didn't know, and wouldn't know for another several months, was what was in Arlen Moss's barn. Not in the sense of equipment or cattle, in the sense of knowledge. Arlen's father, a man named Curtis Moss, had run the same ground from 1959 until a stroke took him off the tractor in 2003. Curtis had not gone to college. He had gone as far as the 8th grade in a one-room school in Monroe County before family circumstances ended his formal education. And he had spent the balance of his life making up for what school hadn't given him by reading everything he could find about cattle and land and the particular problems that came with running both in northeast Missouri. He had a shelf in the farmhouse office with 40-some books on bovine medicine, soil science, pasture management, and animal nutrition going back to the 1950s. He read the Missouri Cattlemen's publications from the 1960s forward. He subscribed to the university extension bulletins and filed them in order. Curtis Moss was particularly interested in bovine respiratory disease because Bird had cost him a calf crop badly in 1971 and again in 1979, and he was not a man who got beaten by the same thing 3 times. After the 1979 loss, he had spent the better part of 2 years reading everything published on the subject that he could locate, and he began a correspondence by letter with an extension veterinarian at the University of Missouri named Dr. Paul Whitfield, who was doing research on bird management and stocker operations, and who had, somewhat unusually for an academic, taken the time to write back to a farmer from New London with genuine care and specificity. Those letters, 17 of them, over a period of about 4 years, are in the binders too. Curtis kept them clipped inside the front cover of the 3rd volume. What Curtis developed, between the reading and the losses and the letters and the 50 years of paying attention to his specific ground, was a protocol for receiving stressed cattle that differed from what most of his neighbors did. Most of his neighbors, when they bought stressed calves, either treated prophylactically with whatever antibiotic the vet recommended and hoped for the best, or held off and watched and treated reactively when animals went down. Curtis had come to believe that neither approach addressed the root problem, which was not the pathogen itself, but the conditions that let it take hold. A Mannheimia or Pastorella bacterium in a healthy, low-stress calf with a functioning immune system was not much of a problem. The same pathogen in a calf that had been weaned, loaded, hauled 8 hours, commingled with strangers, and dropped into a new feed situation was a different matter entirely. The pathogen didn't change. The conditions did. He wrote this down. He wrote a great deal down. When he died in 2009, the stroke had left him diminished, and he went quietly at 74. The single binder in the farmhouse office had grown to 4 binders, and they covered 50 years of observations on that specific piece of Rawls County ground. Arlen had read them, all 4, more than once. The way you read something written for you specifically, even if the person writing it didn't yet know you'd be the one who needed it. He'd read Dr. Whitfield's letters the same way. He'd also updated what Curtis had written in the places where current science had moved past it. That was his own contribution. But the framework, the underlying logic of how to receive a stressed calf, how to manage the environmental and nutritional conditions that bird needed to do its worst, how to sequence rest and observation and limited treatment in a specific order, that was Curtis's, built from 2 bad losses and 50 years of attention. What Arlen did with the 87 calves from Pen 14 began before they arrived. He had prepared the dry lot 2 days before the sale. He bedded it deep with wheat straw, not the thin scattering some operations put down, but a full layer, because the straw was doing 2 things: insulating against the November cold and giving the calves somewhere soft to rest without lying on cold dirt or wet concrete. both of which added stress load to animals already carrying a full burden of it. He set windbreaks of plywood panels on 3 sides of the lot, facing north and west. He ran fresh water in the tanks before the trailer arrived. He did not put out feed. That last part is the one that surprises people when Arlen explains it, and he told me it surprised his neighbors too, the few who asked. The intuition when you're looking at thin cattle is to get feed in front of them. Curtis's notes were specific on this, and the university research that had come out in the years since bore it out. A severely stressed calf's rumen is not functioning normally. Pushing a high-energy ration at an animal in that state doesn't nourish it. It taxes a digestive system that is already overtaxed, and it can turn a sick calf into a dead one faster than the bird would have on its own. What the rumen needed first was time, 18 to 24 hours of hay and water and rest before any significant nutrition was introduced. He unloaded the calves in the early afternoon, let them move into the lot on their own time rather than pushing them, and walked through them slowly that first evening, making a mental inventory of who was doing what. He had a notebook on the seat of the F-250, and he used it. 3 days after they arrived, he pulled blood on 4 animals, showing the worst respiratory symptoms, the ones with bilateral nasal discharge and the labored breathing and the posture that said they weren't feeling the cold the way a healthy calf would, and drove the samples to the vet clinic in Hannibal himself. Not because he needed confirmation of what he already suspected, but because he wanted the specific pathogen identified before he chose a treatment protocol. Mannheimia hemolytica, which came back 48 hours later, responds well to tulathromycin if you catch it before secondary infections compound. If you wait, or if you use the wrong antibiotic for the wrong pathogen, the results are different. Curtis's notes from the early 1980s had been about the importance of knowing what you were treating before you treated it. The diagnostic capability to actually do that hadn't existed in Curtis's time the way it did now. Arlen used it. He pulled 15 calves showing active clinical symptoms, treated them with a single injection of Draxin per the vet's protocol, and kept them in a smaller pen separated from the main lot. The remaining 72 he managed on rest and nutrition and the dry lot conditions, checking them 3 times a day, early morning, midday, and an hour before full dark, and writing down what he saw at each check. Weight, attitude, respiration, the presence or absence of cough, whether they were coming to water. He lost 3 between the first week and the 3rd week. Not a surprise, and not a failure. 3 animals out of 87 from a lot that had active bird before they left the Callaway County operation was a death loss of 4% in a receiving situation that any honest cattle vet would call a success. The industry benchmarks for high-risk stocker receivings run from 8 to 15% mortality, depending on the severity of the incoming disease load. 3 out of 87 was not the outcome the men at the coffee machine had been predicting. Dale Eckert heard about the Pen 14 purchase from a man at the co-op in early December, about 6 weeks after the sale. He made a note to follow up. He drove out to the Moss place on the 15th of December, a cold morning with frost still on the low ground. Arlen walked him out to the dry lot. The calves were going on 7 weeks from arrival. Dale stood at the fence and didn't say anything for a moment. He was looking at 84 animals in good flesh, not fat, not finished, but gaining weight and carrying themselves without the hunched posture and labored breathing that he had cataloged from the ring in November. The eyes were clear. The coughs were gone. A few of the calves at the far end of the lot came toward the fence when Arlen approached, which is the kind of thing that happens with cattle that have been handled carefully and aren't afraid of the person doing the handling. Dale asked Arlen to walk him through what he'd done. Arlen did. He was not secretive about it. He walked Dale through the dry lot preparation, the holding off on feed, the blood pulls, the Draxon protocol, the 3 times daily checks, and the notebook on the truck seat. He walked him to the farmhouse office and showed him the binders. He showed him Dr. Whitfield's letters, still clipped inside the front cover of Volume 3. He explained Curtis's logic, the distinction between the pathogen and the conditions, the idea that Bird was as much an environmental and stress management problem as it was a treatment problem. He talked for the better part of 2 hours, and Dale asked questions the whole way through. Dale drove back to the extension building and wrote up the visit in his files. He noted that Arlen's protocol was consistent with current university research on bird receiving management, but was more rigorously and systematically applied than what most operators in the county were doing. He noted the binders. He noted the letters. He noted Curtis Moss and the 8th grade education, and the correspondence with a university researcher that had started because a farmer had lost calf crops in 1971 and 1979 and decided that 2 losses was enough. He did not think about it again in any significant way until the following October. The respiratory outbreak that moved through Rawls and the 4 surrounding counties in the fall of 2018 was not a mystery. Bovine respiratory disease is endemic in Missouri cattle country, and it spikes in predictable conditions: a wet September, a cold October snap, high animal density at fall sales, stressed calves moving through barns in volume. Those conditions came together in 2018 to a degree that people in the county hadn't seen in 20 years. Death losses started being reported in the last week of October. By the second week of November, Dale Eckert was on the phone with the state veterinarian's office in Jefferson City, and the numbers coming in from Monroe and Pike and Marion counties were significant enough that people were using words like outbreak without feeling like they were overstating it. Operations that had been running a 5% calf death loss for years were reporting 15, 18, 20%. One operation in Pike County lost 31 calves out of 140 before they got the situation under control. And even then the surviving animals came through the winter undersized and underperforming. Arlen did not call Dale. Dale called him on the 14th of November, after the 3rd cattleman in a single week had called the extension office, with losses running well into double digits. He drove out to the Moss place on a gray Wednesday afternoon. Arlen walked him across the farm. He walked him to the pasture where the previous year's receiving calves, the ones from Pen 14, were running as solid yearlings, their bird history invisible in them now. He walked him to the fall calves, the new calf crop, in a separate pasture east of the barn. He walked him through every pen and dry lot on the place. Nothing was sick. Not one animal showing clinical signs. Not one calf with the wet cough or the dull eye or the withdrawn posture that Dale had been seeing on farm visits across the county for 3 weeks. Dale stood at the east pasture gate for a while without saying anything. He told me, 4 years later, that standing at that gate looking at healthy cattle on a farm sitting in the middle of a county that was losing animals by the hundreds was one of the stranger experiences of his 19 years in extension work. He said he felt 2 things at the same time, and he named them carefully: a professional obligation to understand exactly what he was looking at, and something that was closer to the feeling you get in church, which he couldn't explain more precisely than that, but which he did not take back when I gave him the chance to. He asked Arlen what he'd done differently with the fall calf crop. Arlen said he hadn't done anything differently. He had done what his father's binders said to do, which was what he always did, which was what he had done with the Pen 14 lot the year before. Dry lot ready before the trailer arrived, held off on feed, pulled blood on the symptomatic ones, checked them 3 times a day and wrote it down. Didn't rush anything. Dale wrote a bulletin that winter for the Missouri Cooperative Extension Service on bird management in high-risk fall receiving situations. He cited current university research and a number of peer-reviewed sources on stress-mediated immune suppression in beef calves. He also included, in the acknowledgments, a note about an unpublished set of farm management records kept by a Rawls County cattle operation going back to 1959, which he described as one of the more methodical examples of applied observational record-keeping he had encountered in 19 years of county extension work. Curtis Moss would not have known what to do with that citation. He had not written his binders for publication. He had written them because Bird beat him badly in 1971 and in 1979, and he was not willing to be beaten by it a third time, and writing things down was how he organized what he knew and what he was still trying to understand. Arlen Moss keeps those 4 binders in the farmhouse office where Curtis left them. He has added 2 of his own. He still comes to the Rawls County sale on the first Tuesday of the month. He still wears the same Carhartt jacket, and the F-250 in the driveway is a different year than the one from 2017, but not by much. The 87 calves from Pen 14 went to market as yearlings in the summer of 2018 at weights averaging 638 pounds. At 91 cents a pound, where the summer market was sitting that year for that class of animal, the lot returned just under $49,000. The math on that, set against $557.60, is not complicated. Dale Eckert has done it. He still has the notebook entry from the November morning at the sale barn, the one where he noted a man making a mistake. He hasn't thrown it away. He told me he keeps it as a reminder of something, though he was quiet about what. He didn't need to say. The numbers say it plainly enough. There are men who look at a sick calf and see a problem. There are men who look at the same calf and see what the problem is covering up. An animal that got caught in the wrong conditions, not an animal that is fundamentally wrong. The difference between those 2 ways of seeing is not luck, and it is not instinct in the way people mean when they say someone has a gift. It is 50 years of records in 4 binders, and a correspondence with a university researcher who took the time to write back to a farmer who had lost 2 calf crops and was trying to understand why, and a son who read all of it and understood what his father had been working toward. Some things get passed down in land and cattle. Some things get passed down in notebooks. The ones that last the longest are usually both.